At the end of June in 2008, my now ex-husband and I separated. For 2 weeks, I stayed in the income-based apartment of a friend and then moved into the same building that she lived in on Dogwood Avenue in Palmer. The first day I spent in my new home, arranging my few belongings, it was deathly quiet. I contribute that to the fact that I no longer lived with my friend and was alone. I didn't even have my cats as it was a no-pet complex. Except that, out of the corner of my eye, I could see the flick of a tail and glimpse a paw as something trotted out of the room. I could even hear little kitty claws occasionally sticking in the carpet. After 2 weeks of no cats at my friend's apartment, I was curious to why I would see them now. I attributed it to loneliness and left it there. The first night, however, was nerve-wracking. Since it was high summer, we had almost 24-hour daylight. That's Alaska for you. Land of the midnight sun. So it wasn't like anyone could have gotten in my apartment in the dark. I was, and still am, a paranoid freak about locking my doors. There weren't enough dark corners to hide in, and I almost had no furniture. It was an upstairs apartment, so by the time someone could have climbed in an open window, they would have been spotted. Thusly, hearing the repetitive sound of my refrigerator opening and closing puzzled me. There was no mistaking the sound of the magnetized rubber seals around the door of the refrigerator. That sticky schlock sound as it opens and the thump and rattle of the door closing and its constant shaking. I couldn't figure out why someone would be in my apartment at 10:30 in the evening, going through my refrigerator. Surely, if they meant to rob or hurt me, they would have followed the noises I was making as I got ready for bed, but no. Whoever was in my apartment was trying to loot my refrigerator. I grabbed my handgun. In Alaska, you don't need a concealed carry. Thusly, anyone of legal age can possess and carry within the laws, and marched out to my kitchen, determined to give a good scare to whoever was helping themselves to my food. As a side note, my bedroom was on the front side of the building, and the kitchen was on the back side. All the apartments are set up the same, and my across-the-hall neighbor's fridge being on the other side of the wall from mine. The people on the other side of me had their fridge essentially 2 walls away from mine. My downstairs and across-the-hall neighbors weren't home at this point. Upon inspection of the kitchen and then all of the closets, there was no one else in the apartment. I went back to bed, chalking my experience up to exhaustion. For the next half an hour, I listened to the sound of my refrigerator opening and closing. I finally got back up and went out to the kitchen again and managed to catch the act in person. While my fridge door stayed sealed shut, the sound of it being opened and closed repeated itself once again. Having experienced other freakishly odd things in my parents' old house on Soapstone Road, I took a breath and went back to bed. The next night, the fridge continued with making its abnormal noises, and was accompanied by the sound of someone walking around in my living room and down the hallway to my bedroom. No one ever came in. The footsteps stopped about 3 paces shy of my bedroom door. Again, no downstairs neighbor. She didn't even start moving in until a week after I did. As time went on, I accepted the fridge door and footsteps. I had a harder time with doors opening on their own, not 2 minutes after I had closed them. The door to the water heater closet was in my bedroom. Due to the difficulties I had in getting it open, it would surprise me to wake up in the morning and find the door swinging wide open. My sliding closet doors, also somewhat stiff, would be open in the morning or when I came home from work. It got out of hand when I would put keys in the basket on my entry table, get up for work in the morning and have no keys at all. I would check everywhere. Finally, it would come to the point that I would have to say something. "Give me back my keys, please. Those are mine and I need them. You gotta knock this off." I would go back to where I started looking and wouldn't find the keys in the basket. Instead, they would be swinging merrily on the hook above the basket. It didn't seem like whatever was there with me was trying to hurt me. If I outright acknowledged them, the missing keys and opening doors would stop for a while. I think whatever was there just wanted to remind someone that they were there, that they had an existence and deserved to be acknowledged.
It all began when my daughter was 2 years old. She would wake in the middle of the night, the same time every night, screaming and crying beyond control. It would take us hours to get her soothed and back to sleep. Sometimes we would have to bring her into our room just to settle her. Her room is on the opposite side of the house, which isn't huge, just a 3-bedroom, 1-story home. She has had some speech problems due to her ear infection and could not speak very plainly until recently. These occurrences took place for close to a year, and it really began to worry me as a mother. We had hung her stuffed animals from the ceiling and let them hang throughout her room. We thought this was what may be scaring her if she were waking up in the middle of the night, so we removed each of them. She always had a nightlight since she was first born so that she would not be afraid of the dark. After removing all of the stuffed animals, she still had the terrified screaming episodes, and we had no idea what could be causing it, especially around the same time every night. Shortly after her 3rd birthday, she began talking of ghost. Now mind you, we watch nothing of that sort in our home, especially if she is awake. We watch religious shows, but we are sure to not watch anything that may scare her, even cartoons as far as that goes. We are very particular about what is watched on our television. She started talking about a ghost being in her room and in the guest bedroom. She doesn't seem to be as terrified as she once was, but it still concerns me nonetheless. Sometimes she refuses to go into her bedroom or the guest bedroom. Just tonight, she has finally, of her own free will, given me a description of the ghost, and instead of being just one, there is now 2. She has only described one with features of brown hair, brown eyes, and short. She is telling me that it is coming to get her and the 2 ghosts are fighting against one another. Her exact words were, "They fight, Mommy." I have tried to explain to her that her guardian angel is watching over her and that Jesus will not allow anyone or anything to hurt her. I show her that I have trust in her and what she is saying because I don't want her to think I don't believe her. I have a hard time thinking she has made this story up when she has never even watched Casper the Friendly Ghost. I don't know what to say or do when she tells me these things. I say a prayer over her every night and promise her that Jesus will keep her safe. What really freaked me out is when she said, "It is coming to get me." Any suggestions would be more than welcome. I do believe in spirits on Earth, for many of my family members have encountered the spirits of other family members that have passed away on many occasions, mainly in times of desperation, but we don't know who these spirits are, if they are good or evil, or if it's one of each. Could they possibly be fighting for my daughter or for her life? I have noticed that when she is in a deep sleep, she will often stop breathing for at least 30 seconds and begin again. I presume it is sleep apnea, and I have an appointment to discuss this with her doctor. She has also began talking about a baby, and there is no baby there. I am currently pregnant, but she will talk to a baby in the bathtub with no water in it and talk to it laying on the floor. There is no baby doll present when she does this. Is this part of it too, or is she imagining the baby in my belly already being here? I read an article to count out 25 M&Ms to detect someone if your child has a psychic ability. Out of the 25, she got 18 colors correct. They were kept inside the bag where she could not see which color was between my fingers. I told her to think really hard and tell me which color I was holding between my fingers. I must admit, I was shocked at the accuracy with which she knew which color I was holding. 18 out of 25, only 7 wrong, and I believe at that time she was more focused on wanting to eat the candy than she was focused on telling me the color. I am completely open to suggestions and advice anyone could give me, for I am at a loss.
I am 27 years old and I live in Ontario, Canada. I lived in a semi-detached house with my father, mother, little sister, and baby brother. We moved to that house 17 years ago and everything was going great. I was as happy as I could have been, finally in a house with a backyard to play in, grass tickling my toes, and the fresh smell of lilacs nearby. No more apartments. It was exciting. I shared a room with my sister and we had bunk beds. She had the top bunk and I had the bottom. We had our bed set up where our headboards were along one part of the corner and the right side of our bed was against the other. Our bedroom door was on the same wall as our headboards. It was a night like any other night. We brushed our teeth, put our PJs on, gave our parents a goodnight kiss, and headed off to bed. We kept our bedroom door open for some lighting that came from a nightlight that was plugged in the hallway. I was fast asleep until I had a strange feeling that something was in the room watching me. I opened my eyes and turned my head to look at my left, and to my horror there was something there, right up against the side of my bed. It was all black from what I could see. It had long pointed ears that stuck up off the top of its round head, large glowing red eyes, and its clawed-like hands were resting on the edge. I'm not sure how tall the creature was, but all I could see was from the chest up. As soon as it noticed that I was looking at it, it smiled at me, a massive smile with sharp pointed yellow teeth. It dug its claw hands into the bedding and just kept smiling. My heart started racing and my breathing intensified. I couldn't move, couldn't run, couldn't scream. The creature knew it had me trapped, and it smiled even wider. I was so scared that tears started to blur my vision. I had to do something. I had to move. Then all of a sudden, for some reason, I was able to pull the covers over my head and turn away from it. I kept whispering ever so softly, "Go away, go away." And just like that, I was out cold once again. When I awoke the following morning, my head was throbbing and it felt wet at the back. I placed my hand on the area and a wave of burning pain came rushing in. I looked at my hand and it was covered in blood. I ran to the kitchen crying to my father as he was preparing us breakfast. He noticed the blood on my hands and asked if I had fallen out of bed. He took a look at the back of my head and was in shock at the amount of blood. He rushed me to the bathroom and washed off as much as he could. My father told me there were tiny gashes forming into what looked like teeth marks. He brought me to the hospital right away and had a doctor take a look at it. The doctor had no idea as to what it was or what could have caused it, but it indeed looked like a bite. He explained to my father that it was very badly infected and that stitches weren't needed. I was given some sort of ointment for it and had to place it on the wound twice a day, every day. After a couple of weeks or so, chunks of my scalp started to come off and produce such an awful smell that went on for almost 6 years. My family and I had moved out of that house 4 years after that night, and not once since did I see it again. Well, until the first night in our new home, that is. I had my own room now. My bed was in the corner again, but the left side was against the wall. The window was across the room to my right, and my bedroom door was near the foot of my bed. I was asleep, and once again I had that feeling that something was watching me. I opened my eyes, sat up right away, and noticed the creature again. This time it was outside my house, sitting on a tree branch, looking right at me. It just sat there for a few minutes, and I was able to get a better look at its form. It appeared to be about 3 feet in height, and almost humanoid. Its left arm was resting on the branch slightly above it, with the right one on its side. The legs were swinging back and forth, and then it jumped out of the tree in just a flash. I ran over to the window as quickly as possible and closed the curtains, then ran back to my bed and hid under the blankets again.
Although being Filipina, I grew up in California. There came a time during my childhood when my parents decided to buy a house in the Philippines for them to live in when they retired. In 1998, at around 6 or 7 years old, I lived in the Philippines for a few years. English was my first language. I was able to understand a bit of Tagalog, but was unable to speak it. I have gone through a numerous amount of live-in nannies, and each one had different stories to tell. It was during that time that I discovered my love for scary stories. I have been saving this story for a while, and I'll admit that I believe in ghosts, but always thought that stories about mythical creatures and folklore were simply just that, stories. I always felt like this childhood experience was just a dream that was influenced by stories told to me by the elderly people in the Philippines. You know, the kind of stories that are perfect for a cold, stormy night while you're all wrapped up in your cozy blanket, hiding behind Mr. Snuggles the bear for protection. Stories about mythical creatures, about a half-man, half-horse, or those mischievous little dwarves, or of course my all-time favorite, the ASWANG. Tick-tick, keek-keek. There are many names for it. A night-flying creature with bird and bat-like features, glowing eyes, and giant wings that allow them to scour the area for their next unsuspecting victim. They usually prey on pregnant women and children. I was told that they had extremely long tongues that allowed them to feast on their victim's blood or internal organs. Like I said, I have gone through numerous nannies, most of them quitting because I was a brat who had no idea what most of them were saying, until I finally found my very own Mary Poppins. Her name was Joanne. After finding the perfect nanny for me, my parents proceeded to finding housekeepers to do the cooking and cleaning around the house. It was a hit and miss. Some were lazy, some were thieves, while some were the definition of weird and creepy. I could go on and tell you about each and every one of them, but I'll stop at weird and creepy. Lita and Helen were two elderly ladies. They came from a faraway mountain province. Poverty was a big issue in their area. They lived in a small community, living in nipa huts and jungle-like area, not a city for miles, and gas lamps and candles were the only form of light at night. Honestly, I don't blame them for being a little eccentric. It was Lita and Helen who told me the tales of mythical creatures in Filipino folklore. At the time, my dad had our house built in a new subdivision with only a few other houses. So, we were mostly surrounded by trees and open fields. Lita told me about the ASWANG, Kik, and I became afraid when she told me that they liked open areas and lots of trees. But she assured me that they wouldn't be able to get into houses made of cement and steel. Mid-year of 2000, my parents left for their annual 2-month trip to California to visit my older sister, leaving me with the 2 older housekeepers and my nanny because I had school. One night, I remember looking out the front window to look at the moon and my nanny commenting, "It's so calm out tonight." A few moments later, I heard shouting at the back of the house where the big kitchen was. I entered the kitchen to find Helen struggling to keep the screen door closed against the strong wind, while Lita was on the other side holding a machete in the air and shouting at something in the trees of our backyard. I remember seeing the mast tree swaying violently as if a typhoon was on its way, even though it was calm not more than a few minutes ago. As I walked closer to Helen at the door, I was able to discern some words that Lita was shouting. Lita shouted something along the lines of, "Go away. There is no child here. I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not afraid to use this machete on you and cut your tongue off." I was still unaware of what was happening. I became entranced by the whole scene. Helen noticed me and instructed my nanny to take me inside the house and to stay away from the windows. She told me to cover me with a blanket and never leave my side. I ran to the living room and looked out the window. I found it funny that it was really windy in the backyard, but everything was calm at the front of the house. My nanny called out to me and pulled me aside. Next thing I know, I was under a blanket laying down on a couch. Confused, all I could do was listen to all the shouting from under the blanket. I'm not sure how much time passed, but it finally quieted down. Lita and Helen went around the house, ensuring that every window and door was closed and locked. Ever since that night, I would hear a bird-like sound that sounded like key, 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 key. I've seen and heard bats around our mango tree before, but this one was different. It was louder and more demanding, the call of a predator. I was told that this was the kik or ASWANG. Even if it sounded like it was far away, it could actually be circling your roof or even perched on top of it. One night, Lita told me to sleep far away from the window. We had a 2-story house, and all the bedrooms were upstairs. I usually slept in my parents' room, which had 2 giant windows on each side of the bed. So I slept with my nanny on the floor at the foot of the bed. I remember having trouble sleeping, so I just stared at the ceiling, listening to the key, key, key sound coming from somewhere in the distance. Suddenly, there was a scratching sound right above me. Imagine a dog trying to dig at a wooden floor, but getting nowhere since it's of course made of wood. Except this sounded like a much larger animal, with nails or claws that seemed strong and sharp enough to penetrate through the roof and ceiling. A rat or cat could definitely not make that sound. When I started talking to my nanny, the scratching grew more intense and almost sounded desperate. My nanny hushed me and we laid there quietly, listening to the incessant scratching. The longer it went on, the more terrified I became, to the point of crying myself to sleep. My parents finally came back from California, and I told them everything that had happened. Of course, they didn't believe any of it and were very unhappy, and decided to dismiss Lita and Helen. A few weeks later, they found replacements who were much younger and a little less eccentric. My parents instructed my nanny to never mention about mythical creatures or anything scary to me again because I was too afraid to go anywhere by myself. The new housekeepers, Rosalinda and Lolette, knew nothing about the incident with the previous housekeepers. Rosalinda had a habit of waking up at 4 or 5 in the morning. It's still usually really dark around these times, to hang laundry. One morning, I overheard her talking to my nanny. She mentioned that she was hanging clothes around 5 in the morning, and she saw a huge bird perched outside my window, looking inside through the glass. When the bird sensed her presence, it looked right at her and flew away. She saw that it had glowing yellow eyes. Overall, I'm not sure if I believe in mythical creatures like the ASWANG or Kiki, since I've never really seen it. I can't guarantee that whatever was causing all those events to happen was some sort of paranormal being. For all I know, it could have been some undiscovered flying dinosaur like a pterodactyl that survived all these years and found me to be irresistible and tasty looking. All jokes aside, all I can say is that everything that happened was true, and it's the most terrifying experience that I've had. It is also one of my most treasured childhood memories.
My experience happened about 3 months ago. I have always been a believer of the paranormal. I have seen things in my lifetime most people laugh about or joke around with. The truth is, there is another world out there, a spiritual world, and the experience I will talk about is one that until today still scares me. There isn't a day that goes by where I don't think about it. It all began with a book my sister-in-law insisted I should read. As a curious one, I opened it and I began to read one page after the other. This book spoke of ways to bring spirits back to speak to them. It gave detailed descriptions of sacrifice and named names of demons that would help through all these practices. A few paragraphs in, I decided this was way too much for me, so I returned the book and figured I'd forget about it soon. I was so wrong. That night, I was on the phone with my boyfriend as I lay on my bed, and in a moment, this strong, violent wind came blowing, hitting my back with great force. This made me very cold and scared at the same time. I was too scared to look back because this wind came out of nowhere. My window was sealed shut, so there wasn't a reasonable explanation for why this was happening. Then I felt something was staring at me, and I grew more anxious and scared. And I tried yelling for help, but it was as though I was paralyzed. From the distance in the wind, I could hear this vicious dog sound approaching me, getting closer and closer. Only I knew deep inside it was not a dog, but a demon. I was once a strong Christian believer, so I claimed the blood of Jesus. In my mind, since I couldn't talk, I told the demon the Lord was on my side, and that he couldn't take me or hurt me like he wanted to. I kept praying until I came back, and I could finally hear my boyfriend on the phone again. I asked him if he had heard something, and his response was that it had been absolutely quiet, and he thought I had fallen asleep, but I knew this was something real because I could hear my boyfriend, and though I tried asking him to help, nothing came out of my mouth. I never went to sleep that night, and I knew I opened some kind of door by reading that book, and the next days proved it to me. I took a camping trip with my boyfriend's family the next couple of days. I was relieved. I didn't want to sleep in my room again. I thought it would all stop and I'd finally have some peace. I was so wrong. Every night of that trip, this thing came back and just sat at the foot of my bunk beds where I'd hear it growl, and it would be a constant battle to make it go away. Not one of those nights was I alone, yet no one heard or saw anything. As ironic as this may sound, I knew this demon from before all of these things started happening. I had seen him in my dreams. I guess reading that book made him more powerful somehow, and now he was after me and I don't know exactly what he wanted me for. As soon as I made it home from the trip, I called my sister and I insisted she come down and pray for me. We decided I would sneak that book from my sister-in-law's room and we would burn it as we prayed and asked protection from God. The hour came and we began. I won't forget that day. It seemed that as we began to pray, a strong wind started trying to blow away all the pages of the book we had torn out. It took hours before all the pages were consumed, and I saw the demon run through my window. I knew then things would be okay as a big sense of relief came over me. My sister and I talked about our experience, and she described a demon that looked like a dog. Only he stood on 2 legs and was taller than both of us with red eyes and pointy ears. Again, I have seen this demon before, but never so close. I was glad it was finally over. I could sleep again. Since this happened, my sister-in-law doesn't talk to me. She has done so many things to be sure I'm miserable, and I know why. She shared this demon with me for a few brief days, and I pissed it off. I only hope one day she turns to God. Practicing things like this tie you down, so be careful what you read. I learned my lesson.
When I was 13 years old, my dad fell in love and married my stepmother. It was almost like an answer to my prayers. Not only was he happy again, but we couldn't have asked for a better stepmother. She lived in New Orleans, and being closer to my dad's work, he moved in with her. About a year after they got married, she wanted to have a child of her own. They found a beautiful old New Orleans-style home for a growing family. It was every teenager's dream. The entire upstairs was basically for me, my sister, and my brother. The upstairs had 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a living room. We had our own space, and I loved it. Shortly after moving in, though, it became our nightmare. We only stayed at my dad's every other weekend, so it took us a while to realize something wasn't right with this house. It started off as a very negative feeling whenever we would go upstairs. As soon as we'd reach the top of the staircase, the hair on our necks would stand up, and we had a feeling of being watched. The feeling was so terrifying it's almost impossible to describe. We would have friends come stay the weekend on a regular basis, and they refused to go upstairs alone. I actually had a friend wet herself at night because she was too afraid to get up and go to the bathroom by herself. My little sister always slept in my bed because she was too scared to sleep by herself. One night, I had trouble falling asleep. After laying in bed a few hours, I could feel my sister moving in the bed. When I turned to look at her, she was sitting straight up staring at the wall. When I said her name, she wouldn't respond. It was like she was in a trance, and there was no coming out of it. Although it only lasted a few minutes, it felt like hours. When she laid back down, it was like in slow motion, and as soon as her head hit the pillow, I heard banging coming from inside my closet. It sounded as if someone was trying to get out, but couldn't. When I asked her about it the next day, she didn't remember anything. I was so terrified from that experience, I moved my dresser in front of my closet door. I guess it made me feel better knowing nothing could get out. Just a few weeks after that incident, my sister was sitting at my vanity doing her makeup. I had 2 doors in my bedroom, one leading to the living room and one leading to the hall. The door leading to the hall also led to our attic. You could see the attic door from my room. As she was doing her makeup, she was telling me how scared she was to be in the house. She hated being upstairs and told me that she thought it was haunted. Being the older protective sister, I told her she had nothing to worry about and there is no such thing as ghosts. As soon as I said that, the doorknob on the attic door started shaking and the door flew open. I don't think we've ever ran that fast in our entire lives. My brother had an experience in my room. He lived with my dad full time, and one weekend while we were at our mom's house, he heard my sound machine in my room. He walked in my room to turn it off, but it was unplugged and had no batteries in it. He said he left the house, and when he came back later it had turned off. After all these scary incidents, we started sleeping downstairs on the couch bed. We never had a scary feeling downstairs, but early in the morning as the sun was rising, we would wake up to what sounded like someone running up and down the upstairs hall. It happened on a regular basis, but we could never come up with an explanation for the noise. A lot happened in this house, but these were the most terrifying experiences, and I will never forget them. My dad and stepmom always denied having scary experiences in that house. I guess they wanted us to feel comfortable and didn't want us to be more afraid knowing that they were having experiences too. When they moved, they finally admitted that they thought the house was haunted. They had a few experiences, but nothing like we had. The activity seemed to happen upstairs, and they rarely went up there. They did tell us after they moved the previous owners were an older couple and had both died in the house. Nothing traumatic, they were elderly and sick, so it was just their time. They did have a special needs child that had died at a young age in the house. From what we know, they built the house when they started a family, so we were only the second owners.
To understand my story, You first have to know a little bit about this family. My best friend, Jess, and her family were devoted Christians, her father being a minister and her mother a Sunday school teacher. Her and her siblings raised in this strict Pentecostal Christian church in Nebraska. In the winter of 1997, one Sunday evening, her mother and her father were on their way to church when they were involved in a car crash, injuring her mother and taking her father's life. Since his death, the family have fallen away from the church, the mother getting into a rebellious lifestyle of drugs, alcohol, and mayhem. Jess's mother decided to build a new home across town from the house her and her husband had bought years before. Shortly after moving into the new house, Jess's siblings moved out, leaving Jess alone with her mother. Now, jump ahead about 5.5 years to 2003. I'm in the house, waiting on Jess. I'm alone on the main floor. The kitchen opens up into the living room, which has a two-sided fireplace in between. It's midsummer and hot as ever. I've always had a slight uneasy feeling when coming into the house, kind of like someone is watching you, but I blew that off due to the many floor-to-roof windows that opened up into a forested area. While in the kitchen, the fireplace turns on. Disturbed, I walk over to turn it off. When I reached for the switch, I felt something stop my hand and hold my hand against my side. I felt a breeze behind me. Then I felt as if someone was telling me to get Jess and get out, to leave and not return. Something evil was happening in the home. I was so scared, I yelled for Jess and we ran out of the house. In the car, I told her what happened, thinking she'd think I'm crazy. She then told me she'd been seeing images of her dad throughout the house. Sometimes she'd be at peace with the image, but other times he frightened her. We prayed for peace in that home. About 6 months after this incident, it was long forgotten. Nothing else had happened. I was staying with Jess at her house while her mother was out of town. Jess's car was in the shop, so I had driven her to work. Realizing I had left my phone in her house, I drove back over, going in through the garage and into the kitchen. As soon as I stepped into the house, I felt uneasy. I felt as if I was being watched. I remember leaving my phone on the kitchen counter, but it was not there. So I called it using the home phone and I heard my phone ringing in her mother's bedroom. I walked through the living room to her mother's closed bedroom door. As I open the door, I feel heat on my back. I turn around and see the fireplace is on. As I turn back towards her mother's door, I find myself face to face with an image of her father. He looks as real as he did when he was alive, only not as friendly as he was. I felt an evil presence. I was terrified. He smiled at me, an evil and chilling smile. He stepped back as if to let me in the room, but something was telling me not to enter the room. While feeling scared, I also felt calm. I knew the entity in front of me was not her father, but demonic. I remember I kept concentrating on its eyes, and I'll never know why I never once looked away. Believing in the power of prayer, I prayed. I told this demonic thing to leave this house and to leave this family alone. It seemed the entity grew angrier and angrier. The bed started shaking, books falling off the shelves, lights flickering. As the entity started towards me, I remember as I'm staring at this evil thing approaching me, I uttered these words: "You are not Tim. You are evil and you will leave this house and this family alone. You are not Tim. You will leave this house in the name of Jesus." And just as fast as it began, it stopped. I no longer felt scared, but calm. Walking out of the house, I noticed my phone wasn't in Jess's mother's room, but on the kitchen counter where I previously left it. It's been 7 years and a few odd things have happened. Doors flying open, lights turning on, seeing dark shadows, but nothing again happened like it did that summer afternoon. I think her father was trying to protect the family from beyond, wanting to stop the evil. Hey guys, thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the Nightmare Army. I'm always looking for new soldiers in my Nightmare Nation. So I want to thank the two brothers that helped me out with this video, Goodnite, Goosebumps, and Bump of the Night. Thank you both so much for helping me out with this video, and if you guys haven't, please check out their channels. They're really awesome, and I definitely think you guys will like them. So I hope everybody had a great Thursday, and I hope everybody is excited for Friday as well. I know I am. But I do need to ask you guys a question, though. And I just want to know, because I did ask in my last video what more stories you guys wanted. Some of you said deep web, others said stalker stories. I just want to know, for the deep web scary stories, I know a lot of those stories have already been narrated on other channels. I just want to know, do you guys mind if I narrate those? I mean, I want to try to find ones that nobody has ever done before. But at the same time, though, if some of them are repeats, do you guys mind? It's up to you guys, really, because I know that can get kind of annoying sometimes. But anyways, guys, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. And as always, thank you all for watching. And just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.